Hi, I'm Bonnie Kempke. Welcome to my studio and welcome to Quilting on a Thread. This video is going to be the first edition of a video of a video series that I've promised my Cutie Quilters Facebook group, and that's the journey of my quilt. Now, what this started out to be was a video of you seeing me roll this up and create the sandwich. But that became so much cutting and clipping that I decided it would be better to do it with you seeing the back end, and I will have a miniature demonstration. So, to kind of remind you what has been going on was I found this lovely free pattern. It's a Riley Blake Designs pattern, and it's called Anne of Green Gables. This is a 64-inch by 64-inch lap quilt, if you will. And I loved the design of this quilt, but it wasn't large enough for what I wanted to do. So I took the design and I put it into electric quilt, and I made a 104-inch by 104-inch king-size quilt. Now I did that by taking her basic pattern and then expanding the block structure to make it wider and deeper. And then I added some borders and I increased the width of some borders. So whereas she started out with 2 borders, I have 4 borders. And my 6-inch border was originally going to be all of this purple material. One of the things that I promised my Cutie Quilters was, in following me on this journey, I would discuss the errors that I encountered along the way and how I corrected them. And of course, as things will happen, one of the errors was that no matter how I played with it, I just didn't have enough of this 6-inch border material to go all the way around my quilt. And I was wound up being that I was 1.5 inches shy after I'd sewn the different pieces together. So to try and make that an intentional situation, I took the black pattern of material and created a cornerstone. So I penciled that in here on my pattern, and I went ahead and did that, and it actually is a very, very happy error because it looks really, really nice. It's very visually appealing, and in the end, I think that it looks better with the cornerstone than it was going to look without. I just think it adds some visual interest to it. So, of course, that's not going to be the only problem I encountered. When I went to my fabric store to look for backing for this quilt, I found a lovely lavender with purple marbling material. The fabric store is discontinuing this line. They're not going to sell it anymore, so I bought everything that they had, and it was just enough to do the backing for a very large king-size quilt. But as luck would have it, as I was pulling this out, ironing it, and cutting it to make the 3 pieces that I would sew together to be the backing, I found that there was about 1/2 of a yard of material that was unusable. Something had happened in the manufacturing of it, and the weave just didn't look right, and I didn't want that on my quilt. So what I did was I took the remnants of the top, added another color that worked well with the remnants of the top, and my backing material, my original backing material, and I created a disappearing 9 patch. That's what you see here is the backing, and you see that pattern of a disappearing 9 patch. Another happy mistake, because I really have always wanted to do a disappearing 9 patch in a large scale like this. And so this was the perfect opportunity, and this looks really adorable. So that's so far 2 happy errors. And I always like to think that, you know, if something didn't go quite according to plan, there's probably because there's a nicer or more enjoyable way to do it in the end. So that's what I did. Now, that may come up with a 3rd change that I have to make, because I had drawn out this very intricate line and circular pattern, and this pattern fits in the 4x4 block structure of each one of the block patterns in the Riley Blake design that I modified, but I don't know how that's going to look on the back of my quilt. So until I get it over to where I can look at that and see how that's going to place in the disappearing 9 patch, I don't know that I'll stick entirely with this pattern. I may be changing up my stitching design. I don't know. We're going to find out. So when I bring my rolls of my top, my backing, and my batting to this table, now this table is only 5 inches long. I mean 5 feet long, 5 feet wide. But of course this is a king size quilt. It's probably in the neighborhood, well, it's 104 inches long. Hangs off an awful lot off of this table. So I had a lot of bulk to deal with. One of the things I've learned over the years is that I can roll something up and it doesn't look quite the same as when I was working on it. So I need a visual cue to remind me what it is. So I use these tablecloth clips to secure the rolls of the various elements of my quilt sandwich. So I use one color for the backing, one color for the top, and one color for the batting. And that's just to make sure in my mind that I visually know what I'm playing with as I lay it out on my table. Because as I said, sometimes when you roll things up, they don't really look the same way to you, and you go away to have dinner, you come back and you go, was that this element? Was that the other element? So just to be clear, I give myself a visual cue. I never sit down at my table to begin sandwiching without having a tape measure, because even though I've already measured things out and I've pinned the center at the top of each of my rolls, I still want to measure and be sure that I didn't make an error in measuring before. And I always also have a see-through hard ruler. This is a quilt. I mean, this is a programming ruler, and this is from the days back when we printed things off on a type, on a type output. And so the center of this is actually a magnifying glass, and that comes in handy when I need to look at things just to make sure what I'm seeing. But also I love the fact that this is 2 inches wide. And the 2 inches wide and the 15 inches long works really well for me when I have to trim up any extra pieces. That often happens with my batting. I cut it by hand and then I lay it out here on the table, and I realize that, oh wow, there's a wave in it. So I use this, and I use a secondary cutting mat, because I never cut my batting on my regular cutting mat. I always use this mat, because as you can see, the batting kind of seats itself into the cutting mat. So I will push this underneath the batting, and I'll put it underneath the batting. I measure with my 2 inch, and I use my cutting instrument, whether it's a pair of scissors or my circular cutter, rotary cutter. I use this, and I just go along and work along to clean things up. So, measuring instruments. But also, as you know, when you're playing with pieced quilt tops and bottoms, you start working little threads loose. So I have a clothes brush and a pair of scissors, and I always keep those handy so that when I see a loose thread, I just brush it away and pick up my scissors and nip it out of the way. I don't want those loose threads hanging around my quilt body as I'm rolling it up, because those will have a tendency to get caught by the needle and pulled out. And so what they happen is they start extruding themselves from your quilt body or your quilt backing, and I don't like that. So to try and prevent as much of that as possible, I nip those things as they come. For those of you who know me, you know I love my number 2 basting pins. I use these exclusively for my basting, and I love this little bowl because I can open up dozens of these and just hang them on the side, and they're so easy to grab off and nip in place. So this is, as I've already mentioned, my complete quilt body, and you can see this is pretty thick. This is like 6 inches thick, and so it was hard to move this back and forth. But I want to give you a small demonstration. So we're going to use this as my model. And this is my table. This is my backing. So I come up here with my batting all rolled out, and I lay it onto the table. And because I know this table is true, meaning that that back edge is straight and the sides are parallel, it's a perfect rectangle, I will bring my backing up to the edge of the table and line it up where I have my center marked. So here's my center and it's marked, and I have my roll, and I don't let the roll fall off the table, I let it come to the side. And I take my batting and I line my batting up center to center, and however much batting, do I want my batting to come all the way to the edge? Do I want my batting to come 2 inches in? However I lay my batting, and I get that laid out, and I roll that out, and I smooth that out. And then along comes the quilt top. I lay my quilt top at least 2 inches in from the batting. Whether the batting, again, is 2 inches in further from the backing or not is entirely up to me. So then I lay my quilt top on there, and I roll that out and I smooth that out. Then I begin taking my pins and start from the center and pin that in, move a foot over to the right, pin that in, come back to center, move a foot over to the left, pin that in, and I go back and forth across until I cover the entire surface of the table. And then if the quilt is manageable enough, I move the quilt along to the right and continue pinning off to the left, and then I come and move the quilt along the table to the left and continue pinning to the left. Now that I've got the top pinned, I'm going to concentrate on the center of the quilt body. And I just slowly move things forward, unroll each piece, smoothing as I go, and I let it fall off the front end of my table, the back end of my table, and I continue until I have the entire center of my quilt secured. Now, because I have the top secured, this is going to be a lot easier to just roll the whole body back up, move it to the top, start unrolling, continue smoothing, make sure everything is smooth, and do my pinning. Now, it's a lot of shifting of a king-size quilt, if you will, but it's a heck of a lot easier to do it this way than to be crawling around on my knees on the ground, down on my dining room floor, because once I got my cutie, I gave up a lot of floor space in my studio itself. So for me to do this on the floor, I literally have to go down into my dining room and lay it out on the floor there, because that's the only place where I have a lot of space. And so this becomes my roll. I'm just going to get a lot of little pieces out of the way. So I have this roll, and I've secured it with the full-size quilt bands so that I can fuss around with this and play around with this. And this is going to be the perfect roll now to take to my frame and load up on my frame. And I like it partially unrolled and partially secured, because this way I can set it on my cutie frame and begin positioning it into the frame. And that is going to wind up being episode 2 of my quilt journey. I hope that even though you didn't see the full, didn't see me doing the full quilt, you get the idea of what has happened here. And so I also have pinned this to my leader cloth, but that's a different journey, if you will. And I do have a video of pinning my leader cloth onto my quilt body. But I like my leader cloth because it lets me see the center, and I use a lot of pins to secure a king size quilt to that leader cloth so that there's no gapping and little like buttonhole areas where here's a pin, and here's a gap. I use a lot of pins to secure to my leader cloth. So again, I hope that that has been helpful, and if you need me to do something a little more thoroughly, drop it in my comments, because if it's necessary, then on my next quilt, when I do a smaller quilt, I'll actually show the entire process of rolling up the quilt. But I hope that that's been helpful just in a miniaturized demonstration. Hope to see you soon here on Quilting on a Thread. Bye-bye.